The indestructible mailbox. How one engineer demolished an HOA tyrant. Let me tell you, it cost me exactly $1,128 in demolished mailboxes and landed me with over $4,800 in completely fraudulent HOA penalties before I finally decided to stop playing Patricia's game. I was finished. So I constructed a mailbox based on a weathered 40-year-old survey map and a forgotten federal regulation that she and the entire HOA board had completely ignored. That, my friends, is when the real entertainment began. Drop a comment about the most absurd nitpicky situation an HOA has attempted in your neighborhood. Stick around because I'm going to demonstrate exactly how we transformed their own cherished rulebook into the precise weapon that brought their petty empire tumbling down. Let me know where you're all watching from tonight. Settle in. For newcomers to the channel, I'm Walter. If there's one principle I live by, it's that you should measure twice and cut once. I dedicated 42 years as a structural engineer following that philosophy. It's about preparation, accuracy, and executing a task correctly the first time so you never have to revisit it. I was prepared to apply that identical approach to my retirement. My wife, the eternally patient Linda, and I had finally achieved it. We'd saved enough to purchase our dream home. Not a palace, nothing extravagant, just a solid house situated on 2.8 acres of land beyond the city limits. It featured mature maple trees, sufficient space for a garden that could sustain a small village, and the type of tranquility that makes you forget traffic exists. We named it our piece of paradise. That slice of paradise came with a tiny, nearly invisible condition. It was technically, and I mean by the narrowest margin, part of a newer planned development called Meadowbrook Commons, and that condition had a name. Patricia, enter the dragon. Patricia's reign begins. Patricia was the chairman of the Meadowbrook Community Association. From our first encounter at a welcome gathering, I recognized we were headed for conflict. She was a woman approaching her mid-60s who operated a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade and wore sun visors indoors. She possessed that distinctive expression, you understand the type, the kind that evaluates you, determines you're inadequate, and mentally catalogs your shortcomings in a single instant. Our property, with its rustic character, was obviously a thorn in the side of her immaculately maintained community. Most Meadowbrook residences were identical, attractive but constructed on lots the size of greeting cards. Our place was an exception. Patricia approached us carrying a plate with a single pathetic-looking muffin and declared with a smile that never reached her eyes. It must require tremendous effort attempting to bring an older property like this up to Meadowbrook standards. Not welcome to the neighborhood, but a passive-aggressive criticism. That was Patricia's opening move. The first battle, the standard mailbox massacre. The initial genuine conflict naturally involved the mailbox. The property lacked one, so I visited the hardware store, purchased a standard USPS-approved receptacle, and a robust wooden post. I devoted a Saturday to excavating the hole, preparing the concrete and positioning it perfectly. The aroma of fresh mulch I spread around the base represented satisfaction. The final tap of my hand against the post to verify its stability was my declaration. This is our home. 7 days later, we returned from grocery shopping to discover it completely destroyed, simply flattened. Wide tire tracks marked the soft shoulder dirt clear as daylight. The post was fractured. The box was a crumpled disaster, its small red flag twisted into a dejected metal question mark. Teenagers, Linda sighed. I assume she was correct. Just random vandalism. Irritating, but part of life anywhere. So, with a deep breath and several muttered phrases my wife pretended not to hear, I retrieved my tools. The harsh screech of that mangled metal post as I extracted it from its concrete base was the genuine beginning of this entire ordeal. I simply didn't realize it yet. I constructed a second mailbox, repeating the entire process. New post, new receptacle, mixed another concrete bag. This time, I used bolts to secure the post to the foundation, thinking it would be simpler to replace if lightning struck again. I made it stronger, more level, and superior to the previous one. I even painted the post an attractive, dignified forest green to complement our house trim. It looked excellent. Too excellent, apparently. The color police. Strike 3 days later, a pristine ivory envelope appeared in our front door slot. It bore the Meadowbrook Commons logo embossed at the top. It wasn't a welcome message. For violation of the Meadowbrook Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, Article 3, Section 4B, all mailbox support structures must be painted earth tone beige, Pantone 7428C. The structure currently installed utilizes forest green, which constitutes a non-compliant color. A penalty of $75 has been assessed to your account. Please correct this violation within 10 days to avoid additional penalties. Earth tone beige, a color so bland, so completely devoid of character, it could only have been conceived by a committee. It was the shade of weak tea, of dusty cubicles, of complete surrender. It was undoubtedly the most hideous color I had ever been legally required to use. Linda just chuckled and said, "Don't allow her to upset you." But it wasn't about the color. It was about being dictated to on my own property by a woman whose sole pleasure appeared to be others' misery. Nevertheless, I was attempting to be the good neighbor, the reasonable person. So I sighed, drove to the paint store, and had them mix a quart of this beige abomination. I spent Saturday morning meticulously painting the post. Every brushstroke felt like a fragment of my soul dying. I photographed the finished result, emailed it with a sickeningly sweet message to the HOA management company, and confirmed my compliance. The mailbox appeared pathetic, like it was ashamed of its own existence. You can predict what happened. Next, the pattern emerges. The following Thursday, we returned home to find the beige mailbox flattened, destroyed with the same deliberate vehicular malice as the first one. Only this time, while kneeling in the dirt examining the splintered postwood, something caught my attention. A tiny fragment of pearl white paint embedded in the wood grain. Small, no larger than my thumbnail, but unmistakable. It was the exact shade of Patricia's pristine Cadillac Escalade. That's when everything transformed. This wasn't random, this wasn't teenagers. This was a declaration of war. My blood began boiling, but an engineer doesn't allow anger to control his decisions. Anger creates chaos. Data provides clarity. I needed evidence. So instead of marching to her house, I drove to an outdoor equipment store and purchased a $95 trail camera, the type hunters use for wildlife monitoring. That evening, as sunset approached, I crossed the street to a massive oak tree on the common area edge, one with perfect visibility of my mailbox's future location. I secured the camera to it, camouflaged it with branches, and programmed it for motion recording. The nearly silent click of the shutter during testing was the sound of a trap being prepared. Then, for the third time, I visited the hardware store. I bought the identical mailbox, the identical post. I bolted it back onto the concrete foundation, and with grim satisfaction, painted it the most hideous compliant shade of earth tone beige ever created. Then I waited. The next move was hers. The smoking gun, it didn't require long, less than 6 days. I'd developed a routine of checking the trail camera's memory card each morning, feeling like a detective in my own neighborhood. Then one morning, there it was. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 2:31 a.m., shot in that eerie black and white infrared that makes everything appear ghostly. But the subject was crystal clear, a familiar white Cadillac Escalade, the same one I observed Patricia, driving daily, decelerated as it approached my property. It then made a sharp, intentional turn, drove its front passenger wheel directly over my mailbox with a violent crunch, corrected its course, and disappeared into the night without even slowing. You couldn't identify the driver through the windshield glare, but identification wasn't necessary. I had the vehicle, the action, and the timestamp. I saved the clip to a flash drive, placed the white paint fragment in a plastic bag, and felt a surge of justified adrenaline. This was it. Game. Set. Matched out the rigged trial. The next HOA board meeting occurred in the community center's depressing little conference room. It reeked of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Patricia and her 2 board associates, a woman who appeared perpetually startled, and a man who seemed permanently unconscious, sat at the head table. I waited patiently through 20 minutes of discussion about acceptable garden gnome heights before my turn arrived. I stood calm and collected. "I have evidence regarding the repeated destruction of my property," I began. I explained the timeline, the 3 mailboxes, the expenses. Then I displayed the paint chip. I discovered this at the second incident scene. Finally, I produced my laptop. And I have video of the third incident. I played the clip. The board members leaned forward, watching the white SUV deliberately crush my mailbox. When it concluded, I looked directly at Patricia. The room was silent. She didn't flinch. She scoffed. "That could be any white SUV," she said, dismissively waving her hand. "Dozens of vehicles look like that in this county. Are you accusing me, Walter, in a public meeting? This feels like targeted harassment." The drowsy-looking man who served as the board's treasurer added, "The video is inconclusive, it's blurry. We cannot act on speculation or circumstantial evidence." They refused to review it again. They thanked me for my time and dismissed my claim entirely. The system wasn't just broken, it was a fortress designed to protect its queen. I left that room stunned. The counterstrike. The retaliation came 2 days later via certified mail. It was a letter from the board. Not only would they take no action, they were penalizing me. $600 for failure to maintain property in acceptable condition, citing my now destroyed third mailbox, and another $300 for installing an unauthorized surveillance device on what they considered HOA common property, the tree across the street. That's when the engineer in me shut down, and the angry Texan took control for approximately 5 minutes. Then the engineer returned, more furious than before, but with purpose. If their rulebook was a weapon against me, I needed to locate a bigger rulebook, and I found one. The federal ace. I spent an entire night fueled by coffee and indignation, researching municipal codes, county ordinances, and finally federal regulations. And there it was. Knowledge nugget number 1, USPS Postal Operations Manual, Section DMM 508.1. It details regulations for mail receptacles, and buried in the legal language is the core principle. Mailboxes are considered federal property, and the USPS has specific rules governing their construction, placement, and access to ensure mail delivery security and efficiency. The takeaway: federal law protecting mail delivery often supersedes the aesthetic preferences of a local HOA. The following morning, I drafted a polite but ice-cold letter. I quoted the specific federal regulation, stated that their repeated actions and subsequent fines constituted active interference with United States mail delivery, which I noted was a federal offense. I attached a copy of my bill for the third mailbox, and at the bottom, under my signature, I added 2 letters that change everything in a conflict like this: CC. I sent a copy of the entire package to the regional postmaster general. Let's see how Patricia's little board handles a letter from the federal government. The Cold War playing the federal card worked beautifully for a while. About a week after sending my letter, I logged into my account on the HOA's primitive web portal. The $900 in fines had simply disappeared. No email, no apology letter, no acknowledgement whatsoever. They were simply erased from the record as if they'd never existed, but the war was far from finished. It just went cold. The neighborhood temperature dropped by about 40 degrees. Patricia stopped making eye contact. Instead, whenever she drove past, she'd give our house a long, slow, calculating stare. It was the kind of look a hawk gives a rabbit. She was respecting the boundary for now, but she was also searching for a weakness. The atmosphere was thick with tension you could cut with a blade. I hadn't won, I'd just forced a stalemate. Fort Knox. The engineering solution. I figured if I'd won the legal battle temporarily, it was time to win the physical one permanently. I'm an engineer, for crying out loud. If I can't build a mailbox that can withstand a suburban SUV, I should surrender my degree. So I drew up plans. This wouldn't be another wooden post. This would be a monument to stubbornness. I spent the following weekend on what I privately called the Fort Knox Project. I purchased a heavy-gauge galvanized steel mailbox, the type you see in rural areas that must survive snowplows. Then I bought 30 bags of concrete mix, rebar, and a pallet of red bricks that closely matched our house. I built a form, poured a massive new concrete foundation, and then, with the patience of a man who has nothing but time, I began laying brick. I hadn't done masonry work in years, but it returned to me. The distinctive smell of wet mortar filled the air, a scent of creation and permanence. The satisfying scrape of the trowel as I smoothed the joints was music to my ears. I built a 2-foot by 2-foot column of solid brick and mortar, encasing the new steel mailbox in a shell of pure, immovable mass. When completed, it resembled less a mailbox and more a guard tower for a miniature fortress. It was beautiful. I stood back, covered in dust and sweat, and thought, "All right, Patricia, let's see you try to run this one over." The county card, but she didn't. That was the brilliance of her next move. She didn't even attempt it. A few days after the project was complete, I noticed her white Cadillac parked across the street. She wasn't driving by, she was stopped. She simply sat there momentarily, then slowly raised her phone and took several photographs from different angles. Then she departed. No drama, no confrontation. And honestly, it was more disturbing than finding it smashed. A week later, a shiny white truck pulled up to my curb. But this wasn't a Cadillac. It bore the official seal of the County Public Works Department. A man in a hard hat and high-visibility vest emerged holding a clipboard. He was polite, professional, and the bearer of my doom. "Sir," he said, not unkindly, "we've received a complaint about an unpermitted structure in the county right-of-way." My heart sank. He explained that while the mailbox itself was acceptable, the massive brick column I'd built around it was technically a structure. And since that structure was located within the first 25 feet of my property line, it was situated in the county's legal right-of-way, violating Municipal Code 116B. Patricia hadn't used HOA rules. She'd gone over my head using a higher and more legitimate authority. She had weaponized the county against me. I was handed a formal notice. I had 10 days to demolish my beautiful, indestructible fortress at my own expense. If I failed to comply, the county would do it for me and send the bill along with daily fines and a potential lien against my property. I had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. I stood there holding the demolition order, staring at my brick masterpiece. It was a monument not to my stubbornness, but to my failure. I was out hundreds more dollars, publicly defeated, and back at square one. It was the lowest point in this entire affair. I had lost. The darkest hour, I was sitting in my small home office, staring at the pile of documents representing my failure. The receipts for 4 mailboxes, the fraudulent HOA violation notices, and sitting right on top, the official demolition order from the county. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room and everything felt heavy. Linda entered and placed a hand on my shoulder. She looked at the mess on my desk, then at me. "Honey," she said, her voice soft and full of reason. "This is insane. This woman is obsessed with you. Let's just abandon the mailbox idea. We can rent a post office box downtown. It's not worth the stress. Please." She was right. Any logical person would have thrown in the towel. But as I looked at that demolition order, something inside me hardened. It wasn't about the mailbox anymore. It was about being bullied. It was about this woman thinking she could simply steamroll anyone who didn't fit into her perfect little world. This was our home. Our forever home. And I'd be damned if I was going to be driven off my own land by a tyrant in a sun visor. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm not letting her win. Not like this." That rejection of defeat ignited a different kind of fire. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was on a mission. The archaeological discovery, if I couldn't win by building, I would win by reading. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the bulky accordion file from when we closed on the house. It was packed with every conceivable document: title reports, home inspections, loan documents, and the thickest, most intimidating document of all, the original covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Meadowbrook Commons, dated 1986. I dumped everything on the dining room table and began excavating. For hours I read through mind-numbing legal language. Then, at the very back of the file, I found it. Tucked inside a folded, legal-sized envelope was the original full-size plat map of the subdivision. It was a proper blueprint, the kind I used to work with daily, full of surveyor's marks and precise measurements. It was old, the paper was yellowed, and the blue lines were faded, but it was clear. And that's when I saw it. I grabbed my old engineer's scale ruler, the kind I hadn't used in years. The newer simplified maps the HOA used just showed a solid property line. But this original map showed a thin dotted line running parallel to the road, set back deep inside my property. It was labeled 18-foot utility access easement. My heart started pounding. I scrambled back to the CC&Rs and found the corresponding article, and the words practically leaped off the page. First, the easement, an 18-foot deep strip of land, was designated for use by utility companies, including the as Postal Service. Second, a clause I'd skimmed over dozens of times suddenly had new meaning. The HOA, not the individual homeowner, was legally responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of all such easements within the community. The implications hit me like a ton of bricks. 1. The very ground my mailbox sat on, the ground Patricia kept destroying, was land the HOA was supposed to be maintaining. 2. The fines they levied against me for failure to maintain were completely fraudulent. They were fining me for not taking care of their responsibility. 3. The kill shot. Any structure related to public utilities, like a U.S. mailbox, built within that easement fell under the jurisdiction of municipal utility codes, not the HOA's petty aesthetic bylaws. I had been fighting a war on her terms, in her territory, but the whole time I had been standing on ground that legally belonged to a different kingdom entirely. I leaned back in my chair, the old document spread before me like a battle plan, and a slow, wide grin spread across my face. The game had just changed. Assembling the A-team, that discovery of the easement flipped a switch in my head. I went from being a defender to an attacker. But a good engineer knows that for a complex project you need a team of specialists. My first call was to my neighbor down the street, a gentleman I only knew as Old Man Patterson. Patterson was a retired county surveyor, perpetually grumpy, and hated the HOA and Patricia in particular with a passion that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. I walked him through the plat map. He squinted at it, pulled out dusty reading glasses, and let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned, Walter," he grumbled, a rare smile cracking his face. "She's been harassing you over a patch of ground she's supposed to be mowing." He came over the next day with his old transit and tripod, took measurements, and hammered a wooden stake into the ground 18 feet from the road. "That's the line," he declared. "Official." Next, I needed legal firepower. I wasn't going to make another mistake. I spent a day researching property lawyers and found a young woman named Rebecca. Her firm's website had an entire section about battling overreaching HOAs. She was sharp, worked on a flat fee basis, and during our video call, her eyes lit up. When I explained the situation, she wasn't just a lawyer, she was a giant slayer. We had a strategy session with Patterson patched in on speakerphone. Rebecca laid out the plan, and it was a thing of beauty. "First," she said, her voice crisp and confident, "we stop being victims. We send them a bill." This was knowledge nugget number 2. Patricia's harassment caused damages on property the HOA is responsible for, so we draft a formal itemized invoice for the cost of all 4 mailboxes: the paint, the concrete, the bricks, your demolition costs, and your labor hours billed at a professional contractor's rate. We cite the specific CC&R clause making them responsible. The takeaway: you can often hold your HOA financially accountable for neglecting its maintenance duties as defined in your founding documents. Next, she continued, the permit for the new mailbox. We don't even talk to the HOA. This was knowledge nugget number 3. Patterson cackled on the phone. "We're going to draft a permit application and submit it directly to the county planning and zoning office, and we're not just applying for a mailbox. Thanks to Patterson's involvement, We're applying to install a federally compliant mail access utility point and official property survey monument. By bundling it with an official survey marker registration, it becomes a municipal and utility matter, not a cosmetic one. The takeaway: legally classifying a project under a higher government authority can make petty HOA rules completely irrelevant. The final piece was the hardware. I called my old colleague Dave, a guy I used to work with who now owns a custom metal fabrication shop. "Dave," I said, "how would you like to build something that will make a Cadillac weep?" Dave laughed. "Walter, you just made my day. Send me the specifications." The Sentinel. Engineering meets vengeance. The specifications for what we called the Sentinel were magnificent. The foundation would be a 5-foot deep, 3x3-foot excavation filled with steel rebar and high-strength concrete. Set directly into the top would be an official brass survey plaque provided by one of Patterson's contacts at the county. The mailbox itself would be a single welded piece of 1/4-inch thick plate steel, designed with an angled front like an icebreaker ship. The purpose wasn't just strength. It was designed to transfer the full kinetic energy of an impact down into that massive concrete anchor, maximizing damage to whatever was foolish enough to strike it. And for the finishing touch, we planned a small raised garden bed around the base filled with the thorniest, most vicious native cacti and pericantha bushes I could find. A beautiful but painful welcome mat. The plan was set. The team was assembled. The war was about to begin in earnest. The silent strike, our first moves were silent but surgically precise. Rebecca sent the invoice for just over $3,200 to the HOA via certified mail, requiring signature upon delivery. There would be no claiming it got lost. A day later, Patterson and I walked the finalized permit application into the county planning and zoning office. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman with formidable glasses, gave it a thorough review. She saw Patterson's surveyor stamp, the utility classification, the federal mail statutes Rebecca had referenced, and she stamped it approved with a satisfying thump. The only sign of our impending action was a single lonely-looking orange flag on a wire stake that Patterson had planted in my lawn, marking the exact spot for the new survey monument. A quiet, little declaration of intent. I would have paid good money to have seen Patricia's face when she signed for that certified letter. When she opened that envelope and saw a professional invoice billing her own HOA for her acts of vandalism, complete with itemized costs and labor, I imagine the color drained from her face. This wasn't a homeowner's complaint she could dismiss in a rigged meeting. This was a legal and financial assault. Her authority, her control, and her budget were all being directly challenged. And a cornered animal is a dangerous animal. Patricia goes nuclear. Her first move was to try fighting fire with fire. She marched down to the county office herself to protest our permit. Rebecca had warned me she might and had already called the clerk's office to give them a heads up. Patricia, accustomed to having her way, apparently launched into a tirade about how we were trying to build an unapproved monstrosity. The clerk, bless her bureaucratic heart, let her finish, then calmly explained the situation. The permit was not for a simple mailbox, but for a registered utility access point and survey marker. It was fully compliant with county and federal regulations co-signed by a licensed surveyor, and as such, the HOA's aesthetic guidelines were not applicable. Her objection was noted and promptly dismissed. Checkmate. Blocked by the very system she had tried to weaponize against me, Patricia escalated to the last refuge of a desperate tyrant. She went nuclear on social media. That evening, a post appeared on the official Meadowbrook Commons community Facebook page. It was a masterpiece of manipulative fear-mongering. "Dear neighbors," it began, the all-caps screaming from the screen. "I am so sad to have to be writing this. The new owner on Lot 7, Walter, is attempting to build an industrial eyesore on our beautiful, quiet street that violates the spirit of our community. When the board tried to work with him, he responded by suing our HOA. This means your dues will be going up to pay his legal fees. He is trying to lower our property values and intimidate your board. This is not the kind of neighbor Meadowbrook wants or needs. We must stand together against this aggression. The post exploded. Linda and I sat there scrolling through the comments. It was a digital civil war in miniature. "This is outrageous. We can't let him ruin our neighborhood," wrote one of Patricia's obvious cronies. "Will my dues really go up?" "I'm on a fixed income," wrote a genuinely worried older resident. But then, there were others. "Hold on," wrote a guy from a few streets over. "All this over a mailbox? Patricia, didn't you make him repaint it 3 times? Maybe there's more to this story." Another chimed in. "Walter and Linda have been nothing but nice. This seems like a personal vendetta." The battle lines were being drawn. Patricia had fired her shot not at my mailbox, but at my reputation. She was trying to isolate me, to turn me into a pariah before the first shovel of dirt was even turned. But looking at those few supportive comments, I realized something. She wasn't as powerful as she thought she was. Not everyone was drinking her Kool-Aid. The question was, who would show up for the final battle? Installation Day. The show of force Installation Day arrived on a perfect, clear Wednesday morning, and we made sure it was a spectacle. This wasn't just about building a mailbox. It was about making a public statement, our response to her Facebook smear campaign. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, Dave's fabrication truck rolled up, a small crane mounted on its flatbed, followed by a ready-mix concrete truck, its big drum slowly turning. The sounds of professional-grade diesel engines rumbled through the quiet morning air of Meadowbrook. Patterson was already there, wearing his official-looking surveyor's vest and looking immensely pleased with himself. Just as we'd hoped, the spectacle drew a crowd. The Facebook drama had turned our little construction project into must-see television. Curtains twitched. People suddenly decided it was a great morning for gardening or dog walking, their paths taking them conveniently past my lawn. They stood in small groups, whispering, watching. This was exactly what we wanted, an audience. It didn't take long for the Queen to arrive. Patricia's white Cadillac came screaming down the street and slammed to a halt, half on the asphalt, half on the grass. She jumped out, her phone already up and recording, her face a mask of pure fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, marching toward us. "This is unapproved. I forbid this. You're all being sued." Dave's crew, a bunch of guys who had seen it all, completely ignored her. Dave just took a slow sip of his coffee. I gave her a calm, simple nod. "Morning, Patricia. We have all the necessary permits." This only enraged her further. "Permits? I am the board. I am the authority here." She turned to Dave. "I will pay you double what he's paying to pack up and leave right now." Dave just laughed. "Lady, I wouldn't build a birdhouse for you for all the tea in China. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're on a schedule." True to her word, her finger jabbing at her phone screen, she called the sheriff. "Yes, I need to report illegal destruction of property. There's a madman tearing up the neighborhood." The sheriff's verdict 15 minutes later. 2 county sheriff's cruisers rolled up, lights off, but with an unmistakable air of authority. The neighbors leaned in, the tension palpable. This was the moment. The deputies got out looking serious. They were young, professional, and not in the mood for games. One of them approached me. "Sir, we've received a complaint about unpermitted construction and destruction of property." I had a folder ready for this exact moment. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I simply handed it to him. "Good morning, officer. Here are our county-stamped permits, a copy of the registered plat map highlighting the public utility easement and my lawyer's business card, just in case." The deputy took the folder and began reading. His partner watched, hand resting casually on his belt. I saw his eyebrows raise just a fraction. He read for a full minute, then looked over at the survey marker stake, at the professional crew, and then back at the documents. He nodded, then handed the folder to his partner, who gave it a similar review. He walked over to Patricia, who was standing there with a smug, triumphant look on her face. The look didn't last long. "Ma'am," the deputy said, his voice calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "I've reviewed the permits. Not only is this work fully permitted by the county, but it's taking place within a registered utility easement. To install an official survey monument, it is a legal and authorized construction project. Patricia's jaw dropped. But I'm the HOA president. He's violating our rules. The deputy's patience was clearly wearing thin. Ma'am, your HOA rules do not supersede county permits and federal utility regulations. This is a legitimate work site. In fact, if you continue to interfere with it, you could be charged with obstructing a permitted project. I need you to return to your vehicle and let these men do their job. In front of a dozen of our neighbors, Patricia was publicly and officially stripped of her power. She was speechless, sputtering, her face turning a shade of red that clashed horribly with her pastel polo shirt. Humiliated, she turned without another word, got into her Cadillac, and sped away. I looked at Patterson, who gave me a slow, satisfied wink. The Sentinel was going up. The final battle, board meeting showdown. The Sentinel stood guard at the end of our driveway, a solid, dark, unmovable monument to winning the battle. Now it was time to win the war. The next monthly HOA meeting was standing room only. The public showdown with the sheriff had been the talk of the neighborhood, and everyone wanted to see the final act. The atmosphere in the community center was electric. Linda and I walked in with Patterson, and we were met with nods and quiet smiles from people we barely knew. We weren't alone. We took our seats, and a moment later our lawyer Rebecca walked in looking sharp and confident in a dark blazer, carrying a hefty-looking leather briefcase. She gave me a subtle nod and sat in the row behind us. The trap was set. Patricia and her two board cronies sat at the front table looking flustered but defiant. They were wounded, but they still thought they held the power. Patricia banged the gavel. Order. The first item of new business is an emergency bylaw proposal 12C regarding aesthetic and structural uniformity of mail receptacles. She launched into a prepared speech, her voice dripping with fake concern. She spoke of protecting our community's unique character, of preventing unsightly industrial structures, and of ensuring the safety of our residents from rogue construction. It was all aimed at me, a final desperate attempt to use the system to retroactively outlaw the Sentinel. She was about to call for a motion to vote. She never got the chance. I stood up. Point of order, Madam President. Every head in the room snapped toward me. Patricia glared. You are out of order, Walter. Actually, a crisp, clear voice cut through the room. He is not. Rebecca stood up, briefcase in hand. My client has relevant information for the board to consider before any such vote can be taken. The document. Dump Rebecca walked calmly to the front of the room. She opened her briefcase and pulled out 4 thick spiral-bound packets. She placed one in front of Patricia and one in front of each of the other 2 board members. She handed the 4th to the HOA's recording secretary. What is the meaning of this? Patricia stammered. Information, Rebecca said simply. I suggest you read it. The board members hesitantly opened the packets. I could see their faces change as they turned the first few pages. I knew what they were seeing because I had helped assemble it. The first document was our invoice for over $3,200, now stamped in bright red ink. 45 days past due. Notice of intent to file lien on HOA assets. The treasurer's eyes went wide. This was no longer a squabble. It was a threat to their solvency. The second document was a series of crystal-clear photographs taken by Patterson of the brand-new 7-foot-tall vinyl fence Patricia had just installed around her back patio. Next, to the photos were highlighted excerpts from the CC&Rs, the very ones she loved to quote, explicitly forbidding fences of that height and material. It was irrefutable proof of her own hypocrisy. The third document was the kill shot, a formal, legally vetted petition demanding the immediate recall of Patricia as chairman of the board, citing fiscal mismanagement for neglecting the easement, targeted harassment of a homeowner, and unequal enforcement of the covenants. And as the board members flipped through the pages, they saw the signatures, page after page of them. We hadn't just gotten the 51% needed. We had signatures from over 65% of the homeowners in Meadowbrook. The final page, the cherry on top, was a handsomely printed letter on official letterhead from the Office of the U.S. Postmaster General for our region. It commended the design of my new mailbox for its superior security and durability, and noted it as a model of compliance with federal regulations. Patricia was silent, pale. She looked at the petition, at the dozens of names of her neighbors who had turned against her. The other board members, seeing the overwhelming support for the recall and the evidence of Patricia's own violations, began pushing their chairs back from the table, physically distancing themselves from her as if she were contagious. Before Patricia could even process it, a man I'd spoken to earlier stood up in the back of the room. "I make a motion to hold the vote of no confidence and recall as submitted by petition right now." "Seconded," yelled 3 people at once. A roar of "I" filled the room. It was deafening. Patricia just sat there, gavel in hand, a queen in a kingdom that had already crumbled around her. The fall of the queen. The vote to recall Patricia wasn't just a landslide, it was unanimous. In the very room that had been her seat of power, she was rendered powerless. She didn't even stay for the rest of the meeting. She simply stood up, her face a blank mask of shock, and walked out. We never saw her at another meeting. 2 months later, a for sale sign went up in her yard. The white Cadillac was gone, replaced by a moving truck, and then she was gone too. A new board was elected, led by the reasonable fellow who had called for the vote. Their first official act was to sign a check to me for the full amount on the invoice. Their second act was to go through the HOA's finances. They discovered Patricia had been hoarding a massive surplus, using it as a slush fund to pay the HOA management company that enforced her iron will. The new board fired that company and used the surplus to build the new playground the community had been asking for years. The sound of children laughing replaced the sound of tense arguments. The neighborhood started to breathe again. The legend of the Sentinel and the Sentinel, well, it became something of a local legend. It stands there at the end of my driveway, dark and silent, imposing and indestructible. It's got a few small marks on it, not from vehicles, but from what the delivery drivers tell me are kids tapping it for good luck on their way to school. People point it out when they give directions. "Turn left at the indestructible mailbox," they'll say. It's a landmark, a quiet symbol that you don't have to roll over and play dead just because a bully has a title. The raised garden bed around its base has flourished. The pyracantha bushes have grown thick and thorny, creating a natural barrier that's both beautiful and formidable. In spring, they bloom with tiny white flowers that attract butterflies. It's become a small ecosystem of its own, beauty protected by thorns, much like the community itself. Paying it forward, with the money from the paid invoice, Rebecca and I decided to pay it forward. We started the Homeowner Advocacy Project. Twice a year, we hold a free workshop at the public library. I bring my old plat maps and talk about the importance of knowing your property boundaries and understanding easements. Rebecca explains in plain English how to read your CC&Rs and use parliamentary procedure in board meetings. We teach people how to fight back, not with anger, but with knowledge. We show them how to research their property history, how to file public records requests, and most importantly, how to organize their neighbors when facing a common threat. The workshops have grown from a handful of people to standing room only. We've helped homeowners in 3 counties successfully challenge overreaching HOAs, and we've prevented countless others from being steamrolled by petty tyrants. It's the best money I ever made. The ripple effect word of our victory spread beyond Meadowbrook. I started getting calls from homeowners across the state facing similar situations. Each story was different in details, but identical in spirit. Ordinary people being bullied by small-minded officials drunk on petty power. There was Margaret, in Austin, whose HOA tried to fine her $500 for planting native Texas wildflowers instead of St. Augustine grass. Using our easement research strategy, she discovered her entire front yard was actually in a city-maintained utility corridor. The city not only supported her wildflower garden, but used it as a model for their water conservation program. Then, there was Carlos in San Antonio, whose board tried to force him to remove a wheelchair ramp his disabled father needed to access their home. When Carlos applied our federal override strategy, citing ADA compliance requirements, The HOA not only backed down but was forced to reimburse him for the ramp construction. Each victory created another advocate, another person willing to share their knowledge with neighbors facing similar battles. What started as one stubborn engineer's fight over a mailbox had become a grassroots movement of informed homeowners standing up for their rights. The true cost of tyranny. 6 months after Patricia's departure, the new board commissioned an independent audit of the HOA's finances during her tenure. What they found was shocking, even to those of us who knew she was corrupt. Over her 8-year reign, Patricia had issued over $127,000 in fines to homeowners. Of that amount, only $31,000 had actually made it into the Community Improvement Fund. The rest had been siphoned off through inflated management company fees, mysterious consulting charges, and outright theft disguised as administrative costs. The audit revealed that Patricia's management company was owned by her brother-in-law. The emergency landscaping contracts that always seemed to go to the same company? That company was owned by her cousin. The mandatory architectural review process that charged homeowners $200 for simple modifications? Those fees went straight into Patricia's pocket. She hadn't just been a petty tyrant. She'd been running a protection racket masquerading as community management. The new board filed criminal charges. Patricia was eventually convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 2 years in prison, plus full restitution to the community. The house she'd been so proud of was seized and sold to pay her debts. Justice, it turned out, was best served with a side of financial ruin. The neighborhood renaissance with Patricia gone and her corrupt system dismantled, Meadowbrook Commons underwent a remarkable transformation. The new board, led by actual volunteers who cared about the community rather than controlling it, instituted radical changes. They eliminated most of the petty aesthetic restrictions, replacing them with simple guidelines focused on safety and property maintenance. No more paint color mandates, no more garden gnome height restrictions, no more rules about acceptable Christmas decorations. They established a community fund using Patricia's recovered assets and the money saved from firing her cronies. The fund paid for the playground, new sidewalks, a community garden, and annual block parties that actually brought neighbors together instead of pitting them against each other. Property values, which Patricia had claimed to be protecting through her iron-fisted rules, actually increased after her departure. Turns out people prefer living in communities where they're treated like adults rather than prisoners. The neighborhood kids, who'd learned to scurry past our house in silence during Patricia's reign, now stop to pet our dog and ask Linda about the flowers in our garden. The sound of children playing has returned to streets that had been eerily quiet under the old regime. The unexpected alliance. Perhaps the most surprising development was my relationship with some of Patricia's former supporters. 3 months after her departure, I was working in my garden when Mrs. Henderson, one of Patricia's most vocal cheerleaders, approached me with a hesitant expression. "Walter," she said, wringing her hands nervously, "I owe you an apology. I didn't know about the money. I thought she was just trying to maintain standards. I learned that many of Patricia's supporters hadn't been cruel people. They'd been frightened people. Patricia had convinced them that any deviation from her rules would cause their property values to collapse and turn Meadowbrook into a slum. Fear had made them complicit in her tyranny. Mrs. Henderson became one of our strongest advocates for reform. She'd experienced Patricia's vindictiveness firsthand when she dared to question a particularly expensive landscaping contract. The woman who'd once called me a troublemaker at town meetings was now helping other homeowners understand their rights. It was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest situations, people are capable of growth and redemption when freed from the systems that corrupt them. The technical legacy from an engineering perspective, the Sentinel remains a masterpiece of functional design. 5 years later, it shows no signs of wear or damage. The concrete foundation has settled perfectly, the steel shows no rust despite our humid climate, and the brass survey marker still gleams like new. More importantly, it's never been tested by vehicular assault. Word of its construction and Patricia's downfall apparently traveled through the informal network of petty HOA tyrants. No one has been foolish enough to challenge it. The design has been copied by other homeowners facing similar problems. Dave's fabrication shop now offers Sentinel-style mailboxes as a standard product. He sold over 40 of them to homeowners across 3 states, each one a small monument to the principle that bullies only understand strength. I've even been contacted by municipal engineers asking about the design specifications for public mailbox installations in areas prone to vandalism. The irony is delicious. What began as one man's stubborn response to harassment has become a model for public infrastructure. The educational component. The story of the Sentinel has become a case study in Linda's community college business law classes. She uses it to teach students about property rights, the importance of document research, and how understanding legal hierarchies can protect ordinary citizens from institutional abuse. Her students are always amazed to learn that federal law can override local regulations, that easements create enforceable obligations, and that proper documentation can turn the tables on seemingly powerful opponents. Many of them are young homeowners facing their first encounters with HOAs, and Linda's lessons have prevented numerous conflicts before they could escalate. The class project that grew out of our story, having students research the property law, basics for their own neighborhoods, has uncovered dozens of similar easement issues, zoning violations by HOA boards, and cases of financial mismanagement. Several communities have reformed their governance as a direct result of student research projects. Knowledge, it turns out, is not just power, it's also teachable. The philosophical reflection. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I've come to understand that it was never really about a mailbox at all. It was about the fundamental American principle that your home is your castle, and that no petty tyrant should be able to make you feel like a stranger on your own land. Patricia represented something darker than mere bureaucratic overreach. She embodied the authoritarian impulse that exists in every community, the desire to control others under the guise of maintaining order. She'd taken the legitimate need for basic community standards and perverted it into a tool of personal dominance. What we accomplished wasn't just defeating one bad HOA president. We demonstrated that informed citizens working together within the system can overcome even entrenched corruption. We proved that knowledge of the law, properly applied, is more powerful than political connections or social intimidation. Most importantly, we showed that standing up to bullies, even when it seems hopeless, can inspire others to stand up as well. Our victory didn't just save our neighborhood, it gave other communities a playbook for saving themselves. The continuing story. The Sentinel still stands guard at the end of my driveway, a daily reminder that sometimes the best defense is a good offense, properly engineered and legally sound. Children still tap it for luck, drivers still use it as a landmark, and every morning when I collect my mail, I'm reminded that no bully, no matter how petty or persistent, can ultimately triumph over truth, persistence, and the bedrock principle that this is still America, where citizens have rights that no HOA tyrant can legitimately take away. The garden around its base has matured into something beautiful, a small ecosystem of native plants that provide food for butterflies and birds while maintaining their defensive thorns. It's become a metaphor for the neighborhood itself, a community that's learned to be both welcoming and strong, both beautiful and prepared to defend itself.